welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm doing a wrap-up of all the books that I read in April. April was kind of a difficult reading month for me because I was in the middle of quite a few longer books, and so it just felt like I wasn't really making progress in anything that I was reading. So most of the books that I finished within like the last week or week and a half of April, and the rest of it just like I had a couple things sprinkled throughout. So I think I overall completed, if I'm counting correctly, I think I completed 8 books and DNF'd 1. Out of the 8 books that I completed, 2 of those were graphic novels and 1 was a manga. And then I think 2 of them were very short novels. So yeah, so it just felt like I was just slogging through a lot of longer books, and there were books that were left uncompleted at the end of the month that were longer. So that's just kind of how it went this month. The books that I read this month that were good were so good, and then it feels like everything else was like really mediocre, which kind of gave me the feeling overall of just kind of having a very meh reading month. But as I'm looking back over my list, there were some really excellent books that I read this month. So we're just gonna kind of go in the order that I read them. So we're gonna start with the 2 graphic novels that I read, which are actually part of a series. I read both of the Lightfall graphic novels. The first one is The Girl in the Galdurian, and the second one is The Shadow of the Bird. And big shout out to my friend Whitney from Whitney Drew for letting me borrow these graphic novels because the library did not have them and I had wanted to read them for a really long time. And they were just lovely. The art style was just beautiful. I was so impressed by that. And also, like, I really liked the story. Most people say they liked the first one best. I think I actually liked the second one better just because I had a lot of questions about the world and certain things and how some of the fantasy stuff worked. And I got more clarity about that in book 2. Basically, this is about a young girl named Bee who has been raised by her grandfather, but he has adopted her and he's some sort of wizard. And he ends up going missing, and she meets this creature, I think he's a Galdurian, and his name is Cad. And they end up going on this adventure together and finding out some things about their world and all kinds of things. And I loved Cad. He's just like very affectionate but also like hilarious, and he brought a lot of comic humor and kind of a found family element to the story. But I also really loved Bee really struggles with anxiety a lot, and the book never says that, but it's expressed in pictures in a way that I've never seen anxiety depicted before, and it's just beautiful the way that it was shown. It just shows her kind of being like consumed by this cloud, and then slowly the panels will lose color as she's kind of thinking and overthinking and overanalyzing and feeling frozen in her anxiety. And I just loved the way that that was portrayed. It's a great fantasy middle grade graphic novel. Moving on to the first classic that I completed for the month, and this actually was a buddy read with Adrian from Changeling Reader, and we started this book in March, but I didn't finish it till like mid-April. It took me about a month to read this book, and I was really enjoying it at first. I really loved the humor. This is book 2 in the Barsetshire Chronicles by Anthony Trollope. And I can't really tell too much about the plot because there are some elements of the plot that do actually focus back on book 1. But essentially there is this new bishop who comes to Barchester and just wants to kind of change things around, and it shakes people up essentially. And there's a lot of humor in it, but I really ended up struggling with it because I found that a lot of the characters just became really irritating to me. A lot of the choices that they made were just really frustrating, and I found myself unsympathetic towards most of the characters, with the exception of Mr. Harding, who is the warden from the first book. He is just wonderful. He's like a cinnamon roll of a human being, and I just love him. I love his personality, and I love his gentleness, yet his firmness when it's something that he really truly believes in. And I just love him and the way that he acted throughout this book. But I got really frustrated with a lot of the characters, and it just, some of the situations started to feel a little bit repetitive because there was kind of some underpinnings and arguments and misunderstandings and things that just kept swirling around, and things happened and we kept building upon that. But it just felt like we were just cycling around these misunderstandings and things for longer than I think it felt like, longer than we needed to. And so I just kind of felt like the book just felt really long. I think it was in like the 400 to 500 page range. I know it was under 500, but I think it was over 400 pages. And it felt a lot longer than that to me, unfortunately. And so did The Warden. I enjoyed The Warden, but that book is under 200 pages and it definitely felt longer than that to me. And so I don't know. I do own the rest of the Barsetshire Chronicles, so I am planning to continue with them at some point. But I was really hoping that Barchester Towers would be an amazing book. It actually made it onto my 5-star predictions list for the first quarter of the year, and I didn't love it, unfortunately. It's kind of like a 3.5 star for me, where elements of it were really good, but a lot of it I just kind of stopped caring by the time we got to the end of the book, unfortunately. The next book that I completed for the month of April was actually the book that we were reading for my Patreon. So the day that this video comes out will be the same day that we're having our Zoom discussions for Oh Pioneers by Willa Cather. As you can see, I have quite a few tabs in this. From the very first sentence of this book, I was like hooked. I love Willa Cather's writing. This is the first of hers that I have read, and it is just beautiful, and it just sets the stage so well. She has very pastoral writing, which felt super appropriate for spring, although the book does open in winter. But we experience all seasons throughout this book. So in the beginning, we are following a young girl, Alexandra, and she lives on a farm in Nebraska. Her family are Swedish immigrants. And it's just kind of following her life and her trajectory living in this place. It's not just following her, it's also following her brothers and some neighboring people and some other things, and people who have immigrated from other places, and their relationship with the land and with farming and with one another. And so there's a lot of things that are explored in this that are just beautiful. And I thought for sure as I'm reading this, I'm like, oh my word, this is going to be a new favorite book for me. And then I got to the end, and I don't want to spoil the end at all, but I will say that Alexandra kind of made some choices and came to some conclusions about things, and the way that she processed those things. Not only did I just fundamentally disagree with them as a person, some of the ways she felt about things, but it felt antithetical to her character, and it felt like not the way that she would have actually thought or behaved. And so that brought it down for me, but the writing was just so amazing, and I really enjoyed the character work up until that point. So I would still say that this is a solid 4 stars for me, but the writing itself is 5 stars for sure. The next book that I completed this month was a buddy read with my friend Dia from Novel Idea, and we read Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This is the first in the arc of a Scythe trilogy, and it's a dystopian world where basically humans have found out everything that they could ever possibly know. And so as a result, they have cured every single disease, and they've even found ways to genetically reset themselves to younger selves. And as a result of that, no one ever dies. And so they have to appoint scythes, which, I mean, are, you get the sense from the cover that they're basically kind of almost like these Grim Reaper type figures. They're not scary like Grim Reapers though, but they do what's called gleaning, where they basically cull the population because otherwise it will be way too overpopulated. So basically in this book, we are following 2 young characters, Citra and Rowan, who are chosen by a scythe to be his apprentices, to learn how to do this. And it's really, really fascinating. The world building in this, I thought, was so good. I just really enjoyed the way that Shusterman worked through what this looked like practically and how these things worked out. And I also really liked at the beginning of each chapter, we would have a journal entry from the Scythe. And the Scythe are actually, they're required to write in their journals, and their journals are required to be public to everyone. And at this point in everything, they, instead of the cloud, they have the Thunderhead, which is where you can access all knowledge. So anyone could look up any of their journals in there. So we're getting journal entries from Scythes as we're reading this that are kind of exploring the morals and the ethics of what they're doing, and what does this mean for them, and just all these different things that take this to such a deep level beyond just the story. And I really appreciated that. I thought that that added so much to it. And then on top of that, the plot was really interesting too. So I absolutely loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. There were a couple of small issues that I had with it, most notably the fact that Citra and Rowan, as a boy and a girl, and they're teenagers and they're just instantly like attracted to each other. It was really awkward feeling and like really cringy, but it didn't stay that way. That's all I'm gonna say about that, is that we didn't stay in that place. It was more like offhanded comments, and because that's not how they behaved a lot of the time, the offhanded comments really were jarring to me and just made it feel that much more cringy to me. Also, not once, but twice did characters let out breaths they didn't know they were holding. 2 times. 2 different characters. And I'm like, come on, man. Come on. Do better. Those are my only 2 complaints though. And I really struggle with like angsty teen romances, but this didn't really delve into that territory for me. So otherwise I think that this would have been lower rated, but I really loved it. This is one of my favorite books that I read this month, and I did not expect that going in. I actually ended up with this book for free at some point and was just like, oh, I've heard good things. I've heard a lot of people say the trilogy doesn't end well, but I've heard good things. And so yeah, so I loved it. I was blown away by it. I was blown away by the depth, especially in terms of discussing morals and ethics surrounding all of this, and the nitty-gritty of how all this works, and like how the Scythes are in their meetings and in their interactions with other people. And there was just so much about it that I just really, really love. I find that when sci-fi takes a dystopian turn, I almost always love that. So Dia and I are continuing on with this series. We both really enjoyed this book. Next up is a manga that I read this month, and that is Spy Family Volume 8. And I think that this is the most recent volume that my library has. Pretty sure that they don't have Volume 9 yet. But I loved this. The last one that I read, I didn't like quite as much. There were just, some of it just felt disjointed. There was several different plots within it, and there were just some things in it that I just didn't love. I loved this one. This is one of my favorite ones so far, and I have seen some people disagree, and I totally get that, because this one is much more heavy on violence. And on the pages where there's a lot of violence that's happening, sometimes it's really hard to follow the action. But I did just love everything really about it mostly. So at the end of the last book, we find out that the mother, who is an assassin, is being sent on this cruise ship as a job, that she has to be a bodyguard for somebody. And then the little girl Anya enters into this contest and ends up winning tickets to go on this same cruise. So while Yora's on this cruise trying to be a bodyguard and trying not to let Lloyd and Anya know that she's actually an assassin and she has these very violent jobs, she's trying to do her job while trying to like avoid Lloyd and Anya on the cruise ship. And the logistics of that are hilarious. The way that Anya's mind works throughout this is hilarious, and the way that Lloyd is trying to be is so funny. I just love the family dynamic in this, and I loved like the plot line of it. I loved the ending, and it actually kind of has like a little bit of a cliffhangery ending, and most of the times the volumes don't really run together in terms of plot. I mean, we did get the setup for this at the end of the last volume, but typically it's not a big long plot. It's mostly the fact that they're kind of like this fake family is really the plot that you get, and then there's just little missions and little things that pop up while that's going on. And this one was just like, it was so good. It was very cohesive. And I just loved the family dynamics. I laughed out loud quite a few times while I was reading this one. Next up, we had my one DNF for the month, and that's Where'd You Go Bernadette by Maria Semple. And this is a book that was on my Read a Rid project, and it was the one that got chosen for April for, I think, the Read Your Bookshelf Challenge is, I think, the one that it was for. And I bought this book when I had heard a couple of people talk about it, saying it was one of their favorite books ever, and then since found out that we don't often overlap in our tastes, and so kind of went into it a little bit hesitantly and gave myself to permission to DNF it really quickly, because I got about 50 pages in and just couldn't take anymore, to be honest. So my understanding of what this book is about is it's about this mother who is agoraphobic, and then she goes missing at some point, and her family is looking for her. And that has not yet happened at the point where I DNF'd the book. So the book is basically about this family, and they are very, very wealthy and living in a rich neighborhood. Their child goes to like this very rich school, and she gets amazing grades, and they promise her if she gets whatever grades that they would give her anything that she wanted. And so she wants to go on this trip, and they're trying to arrange it, and there's all this drama between the other rich parents in the school, and it's just like everyone is just like so vapid and annoying. And I just wasn't a fan of that. I also was not a fan of the fact that this is mostly epistolary in nature. There's a couple points where the daughter has an actual narrative where she talks about something that happens. But there's a lot of letters between Bernadette and like her assistant, and they're like emailing back and forth about the details of the trip. And then there's like letters from like the PTA about an incident that happens at school, and then like letters between one of the snooty rich people and like some sort of landscaper. And I was just like, this is not it for me. I'm just not a very big fan of epistolary novels in general. For a really difficult time connecting to the characters and getting interested in them. It just like feels so distant for me a lot of times. And this not only did I not like the epistolary format, but every single character was just really annoying, except maybe the daughter. The daughter wasn't annoying, at least not yet. But the other ones were just like, why? Why are you like this? Why? So I had a feeling I might not like it. And since I had that feeling, I was just like, I was already feeling really slumpy from some other books that I had been reading or trying to get through. And so as a result of that, I'm like, no, I don't have to read this. This isn't a buddy read. I don't have to read this with anyone. So I'm just not going to read it. So I did DNF it. I'm sure that there are a lot of redeeming qualities to it since so many people really do love it. But I just was really struggling with the format. The next book that I finished this month was The Enchanted April by Elizabeth Von Arnhem. This was a buddy read with Kelly from Kelly Reads a Lot. And this is the perfect time to read this book. I was going into it expecting to just absolutely adore it. The only thing that I knew going in was that there were 4 women who decided that they were going to travel to Italy together. And that is basically the overall premise, is that these 4 women are practically strangers, and they decide that they are going to vacation together in San Salvatore, Italy, because there's this castle that's going to be vacant for a month. And they decide that if the 4 of them go together, they can split the costs and enjoy going together. 2 of them, kind of like our more main ladies, are Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Arbuthnot, and the 2 of them kind of know each other. They like go to the same church, but they've never had a conversation before. And Mrs. Wilkins comes up to Mrs. Arbuthnot and just kind of like suggests this trip. And then they end up finding a very wealthy lady, Lady Caroline, who is like a young lady who's just always had everything that she wants, and everyone wants to be around her. She's beautiful and just influential and from a really rich family. And then they also invite Mrs. Fisher, who is an elderly lady who loves to name drop. Let me just tell you, she knew all these amazing old people, and life was better back then, and she's just kind of living in the past. So these 4 women end up going to Italy, and it kind of ends up being kind of a transformational experience for them. They're experiencing the magic of San Salvatore, the magic of Italy, and the beauty of the nature around them. And that's kind of the premise of the story. I didn't love this book. In fact, I didn't really even like most of it. Unfortunately, I found the characters to be incredibly shallow and self-centered. And with the exception of Mrs. Arbuthnot, I felt like her character was much more well fleshed out, but the other characters were very shallow, and the transformations that took place seemed to be extremely like a switch flipped, and like, oh, now everything is different. And each one of these women have like complicated relationships with men in their lives, especially Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Arbuthnot. Those two really have complicated relationships with their husbands, and the way that those are resolved are not very believable to me, and in some ways are actually kind of like offensive to me as a woman and just as a person. I'm just like, ew. So I have to say though, like, I love the descriptions of San Salvatore. It's beautiful. Elizabeth von Arnhem's nature writing is gorgeous, and I loved that. And there were some very, very funny scenes in this book that made me laugh out loud. And so there were elements. I liked the writing itself. We'll put it that way. I liked the writing itself, but I didn't really like any of the characters and couldn't find myself rooting really for any of them. Unfortunately, I just found it all just to be kind of frustrating. And so I'm like, I would love to read about this castle and just with different people. So unfortunately, it's not a new favorite for me, and I would like to try another Elizabeth von Arnhem at some point, and hopefully I will get on better with some of her other books. Last book that I finished this month was towards the end of the month. It took me like all month to finish this book. I think that if I hadn't had so many other books going on at the same time, it wouldn't have taken me quite so long, but it really did take me a while. And this is a buddy read with my friend Whitney Drew, and we read Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 2 of the Stormlight Archive. I read Way of Kings last summer, and then I read Words of Radiance, and I was planning on posting a vlog of my reading experience, and unfortunately there was an issue with some of the footage, and so I'm not going to be able to do that. So I'm just going to talk about it here, and I can't talk spoilers. So I'm not even going to really talk about the plot because I don't know how to do that without spoiling anything from the first book. And also there's so much to it. Brandon Sanderson puts so much into his fantasy worlds. This man is a genius. I don't know how he does it. He crafts these just immense worlds with all these different people types, with all these different religions, with all these different languages, and just all these things. And there's so much to it. He's created so many animals that like don't exist in any sort of mythology, and they're not really based off of any mythological creature. And it's impressive to me the way this man can craft entire worlds. He's a genius. He's a genius. So in this book, we're following the same characters from Way of Kings, and I actually struggled a lot with this book, unfortunately, but it was not the fault of the book. It was the fault of me because I waited way too long in between. I think I waited 6 or 7 months in between Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. And so we're picking up where we left off, and I forgot everything. Not literally everything, but there was so much that I forgot. Like they're describing, they're like, we're in this situation. I'm like, who is this person again? Like if it wasn't a lead character, I didn't remember them. And there was just so much that I was just like, what? And so literally for the first like quarter of the book, I felt so lost. And I felt that way with Way of Kings too, but that was because he was establishing a world. This was my own fault. This was because I'm like, I don't remember you people. I don't remember this situation. I don't know what you're alluding to. And so I had to go back and read a synopsis. And once I did that, I felt better. And once I got more into the rhythm of the story itself, I felt better also. But it's long. It's 1,100 pages, and it took me all month to read because I was reading so many other books at the same time, and because I was so confused in the beginning that made me a little demotivated to read it as much as I could have. But as the story went on, it was just like masterfully told, unbelievable. And once I got to the end, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I I loved it. There were some really great reveals, some really great world building, and I'm so excited to continue in this series. Next month, we're reading Warbreaker, which I had quite a few people tell me is best read between Words of Radiance and Oathbringer, even though it's not technically part of the Stormlight Archives. It is part of the Cosmere, and so that is like the best time to read it because there are things in Warbreaker that are referenced in both Words of Radiance and Oathbringer. So we're reading that one next, and then we'll probably read Oathbringer after that. But it was so fun to read this with Whitney because Whitney I know in real life. She is such a sweetheart, my goodness. We met through our homeschool group, and so we would get together every week during our homeschool group and be like, oh my gosh, what about this? Oh my gosh, what do you think about this? And it was just so fun to chat with her about this. It just made the experience that much more fun to have someone like in real life having face-to-face discussions with them about the book. This is like the first time I've ever done that. I've never participated in an in-person book club. I've never had any close friends in real life that are reading the same books that I'm reading. So it was really a great experience. So I'm really excited to continue on. So those are the books that I completed in the month of April. The ones that were good were really good, and the ones that weren't were really meh. And a couple of them were just felt downright bad to me. But I'm thankful for the really good books. So I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. How was your April reading month? Did you have a new favorite that you discovered, or any just wonderful books that you would love to tell me about? Because I would love to hear it. So please let me know in the comments down below. And thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me. And I will see you again next time.